horrors of the music industry is the fact that there are monsters who walk around with infinite access to vulnerable people who they can easily prey upon, all while receiving protection and approval from some of the most powerful people in the industry. One of those many monsters is Brian Warner, better known by his stage name Marilyn Manson. Over a dozen young women have come forward with allegations against Brian, accusing him of doing some absolutely abhorrent, graphic, and extremely disturbing acts to them. I have to be very careful with my words in this video to ensure that it does not get flagged, so please bear with me. So who is the sick man behind this rock star facade? As always, let's go back to the beginning. Brian Hugh Warner was born on January 5th of 1969 in Canton, Ohio, and he is 54 years old today. Brian's childhood was unfortunately exceptionally traumatic, and he went through some horrific experiences at a very young age. Not only was Brian the victim of SA at the hands of an older boy who lived in his neighborhood, and this continued for an extended period of time. When Brian actually found the courage to tell his mother what was happening to him, this older boy found out and subsequently unalived Brian's dog in retaliation. Brian's mother also allegedly struggled with Munchausen's by proxy, and she constantly had Brian in and out of the hospital throughout his childhood. Brian's mother was also very hypercritical of her son's appearance. Brian's father was a soldier in Vietnam who had participated in spraying Agent Orange. For a while, this made Brian look at his father as an evil man and refer to him as the Slayer. Brian attended a private Christian school from grades 1st to 10th, and he really did not enjoy his time there. It was at this time in his life that Brian realized that he enjoyed being oppositional towards authority and often liked to do exactly what his teachers, religious directors told him not to do. This oppositional characteristic is one that Brian still carries to this day. For his last 2 years of high school, Brian was put in public school, and he was unfortunately the target of harsh bullying from his peers. Another trauma that Brian endured that really stuck with him was when he was a very small boy. He crept into his grandfather's basement. He found his grandfather taking care of himself to adult content while standing over Brian's train set. This situation was seemingly burned into Brian's memory as it later inspired one of his hits, Kinderfeld. In 1990, the Warner family moved from Ohio to Florida, and this is right around the time when Brian took up a liking to rock and roll music. When the family moved to Florida, Brian enrolled in community college where he was pursuing a degree in journalism. Later that year, Brian and a couple of friends that he had made decided to start a band. This is when Brian adopted the stage name Marilyn Manson, and the band was named Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. The band quickly grew a fan base in the South Florida hardcore music scene.
Marilyn Manson and the Spooky Kids. Thanks everyone for voting for us. We love you. We love you all.
The band would put on shocking and graphic performances that involved nudity, children in cages, and animal remains. After having a massively successful first year, selling out any nightclub or venue that they were booked at, in 1991, the band signed a deal with Sony Music. Sony later rescinded their offer, and the band decided to record their own studio album independently. In 1992, the band shortened their name to just Marilyn Manson, and while they were not signed, they continued to record and sell cassettes of their music, as well as perform to large audiences. In 1993, Marilyn Manson was signed to Nothing Records, which is affiliated with Interscope Records, and in 1994, the band released their first real studio album titled Portrait of an American Family. On top of a flourishing music career, Brian was also involved in many different film and television projects. Brian can be seen in Jawbreaker, Sons of Anarchy, Once Upon a Time, Californication, and many more. Now, I'm not going to go through each individual album or song that Marilyn Manson came out with, but over the next about 10 years, Marilyn Manson continued to create music that appealed to their growing fan base. While Marilyn Manson had a massive and growing group of loyal fans, he also had a lot of people who did not think his music was suitable for young minds. Brian Warner has been very open about his affiliation to the belief system of Satanism. And today, in present time, not only is Brian a member of the Los Angeles First Church of Satan, he also holds honorary priesthood. I want to dive into Brian's very disgusting and problematic history with romantic relationships. Before we do that, I want to share a couple of things that I came across while doing research for this deep dive that I found absolutely shocking about Brian Warner, Marilyn Manson. In 2001, Marilyn Manson was performing at Ozfest, and at this performance, Brian SA'd a security guard while he was performing on stage. While Brian was performing in a thong, he wrapped his legs around the head of a security guard who was like on floor level and he was on stage level, kneeling down. He wrapped his legs around the security guard's head and forced the guard's head into his nether regions. Brian was charged with battery and SA for this situation, but the charges were later dropped when Brian paid the security guard off outside of court. The thing that Brian Warner did in his performances that I find really disturbing is he would physically harm himself while performing. In one performance, he picked up a broken beer bottle and dragged it across his torso while the audience watched in horror. Brian Warner has admitted in an interview that when he was in his late 20s, him and some of his friends decided to go grave digging in New Orleans. Brian and a couple of his friends went to a cemetery where they began defacing gravestones and digging up human remains. But unfortunately, that story's not over there. Brian and his friends took the human skeletal remains back to their hotel where they began chipping down and breaking down the bones. They basically turned the bones of someone's loved one into dust. After this, they proceeded to put the crushed skeletal remains in a device and smoke the remains. Brian recounted that the burning bones smelled terrible and gave them all a headache after they were done smoking it, and it made all of their eyes really red. On Halloween Day of 2021, people and fans were very confused to see Marilyn Manson being a part of Kanye West's Sunday service. Kanye has gone out of his way to share that he is a born-again Christian and holds Sunday services to worship the Lord as a community. People were shocked to see Marilyn Manson, a Satanist, being a part of what they believe to be time of worship to the Christian God. Justin Bieber, who has also expressed that he is a Christian, was also an integral part of this service.
More love than we are right now in this moment. In this moment. Wrap us with your love. Show us who you are.
At one point in the service, Brian can be heard saying, "Thank you for your forgiveness. We cast out any demonic activity that could potentially steal our peace or joy." I don't know what that means coming from him. I have no idea what that means. Earlier that year in August, Brian was also a part of Kanye West's Donda album premiere.
Tell me how to talk, I know that I seen it when I was talking. One more 2 week jobs to take every little kids. My uncle's watch, we was raised by the crackhead.
Kanye has been open with the fact that he plans to collaborate with Marilyn Manson in the future and will continue to work with him. So if you needed another reason to not like Kanye, there you go. Now let's rewind and do a timeline of the multitude of failed relationships that Brian has had at the hands of himself. As the Marilyn Manson fan base grew, women were very interested in being acquainted with the next big rock star. Brian met the actress Rose McGowan in 1999, and the two began dating quickly after, and that quickly led into an engagement. Our relationship ended almost as quickly as it began, and in 2001, the couple called it quits. In later interviews, Rose has shared that the reason that her and Brian's relationship did not work out was because Brian had a really bad issue with substances. Shortly after Rose and Brian's engagement ended, Brian met the queen of burlesque, Dita Von Teese, while she was backstage of one of his shows. The two became acquainted over a bottle of alcohol, and they quickly began a romantic relationship. The couple dated for nearly 5 years before exchanging vows in 2005. The couple's marriage was short-lived, and by 2007, they were divorced. Later interviews, Dita has shared that the end of her marriage was so tumultuous that she had to pack up all of her belongings on Christmas Eve of 2006 and move out of their marital home. According to Dita, the couple's marriage was filled with infidelity and substance use on Brian's end. Dita has been open with the fact that while she absolutely supported her husband's career, she did not support his lifestyle of partying hard and substance use. So Brian would often step out of the marriage and find girls or women who would validate him and his lifestyle. While still married, Brian took a specific interest in a teenage girl named Evan Rachel Wood. If the name does not ring a bell, Evan has starred in the movie 13 as well as the series Westward. She has also been in many other projects. In 2007, fresh out of his marriage, the 36-year-old shock rocker met 18-year-old actress Evan Rachel Wood. According to Evan, the moment they met was the moment that Brian began grooming her. That same year, the couple began dating publicly. A year later, when Evan was 19, her 37-year-old boyfriend asked her to be in one of his music videos entitled Heart-Shaped Glasses. Evan, who was excited about the opportunity, agreed. But unfortunately, Evan did not realize that participating in this music video would mean one of the most traumatic and horrific experiences would be filmed and played over and over and over again for the world's entertainment. For the filming of this music video that is still available all over the internet today, Brian fed his young girlfriend copious amounts of substances and alcohol to the point that Evan was completely inebriated and in like a dreamlike state, she describes. Camera began rolling, and Evan, who was completely inebriated, realized that her boyfriend was ripping her clothes off of her body. He proceeded to R-word her on film for the music video. When Evan agreed to do this music video, Brian said nothing about sex on camera. But Evan was so wasted out of her mind that she wasn't able to stop what was happening. Brian Warner, or Marilyn Manson's music video for Heart-Shaped Glasses, is available on YouTube anywhere today, and it has footage of a 19-year-old being R-worded. So I don't recommend watching that. By 2010, Evan and Brian were engaged, but their relationship ended just 7 months later. Leaving Brian was something that was extremely difficult for Evan, as every time that she tried to leave him, Brian would harass her, threaten to unalive himself, harm himself, threaten her family. It was very toxic. In 2016, Evan began sharing openly on her social media how she had been treated horrifically by an unnamed man in a past relationship. While some speculated that the man who had harmed her was Marilyn Manson, Evan kept his identity under wraps because she was facing blackmail, intimidation, and threats from Brian's legal team. Evan has shared that she was put through manipulative brainwashing in order to break down her psyche and make her be submissive to Brian. She has openly described what Brian put her through as hell on earth. Brian had so much control of Evan. He controlled her sleep and her eating. At times, he would even starve her and force her to stay awake for days at a time if he was angry with her. At one point, Brian even forced Evan to consume his blood. Since breaking free from her relationship with Brian, Evan has become a fierce DV advocate for other victims who have gone through similar situations as her. Evan even played a critical role in passing the Phoenix Act in California, which gives DV survivors more time to come forward before the statute of limitations gets in their way.
He cornered me in our bedroom and asked me to kneel while he tied me up by my hands and feet. Once I was restrained, he beat. To him, it was a way for me to prove my loyalty. The worst part was I still felt it was somehow my fault because society had told me I should just leave when someone hit me, but this was so much more complicated and so much scarier than anything had ever prepared me for. I didn't know what to call it. The shame is still overwhelming, and it's taken all of my strength to speak publicly and to pursue this. Even today, the fear of being judged by society is debilitating, and the fear of retaliation from my is paralyzing. By speaking to you today and every day, I put myself at risk as I have no protection. The final push into creating the Phoenix Act was the crushing realization years later that he had done this to several people, and it was very likely there were more victims. So I tried to take my evidence to the state in an attempt to stop this from happening to anyone else. My evidence included photographs and video, not just relying on memory. It cannot be viewed by the state because the statute of limitations on my case has run out. I know that this bill will not affect my case, but I urge you to vote yes on the Phoenix Act to create a cushion for victims to leave their dangerous situations, get the help they need, and come back from their trauma.
It wasn't until 2021 when Evan decided to expose the identity of the man who had harmed her for so many years. Evan shared that she had been harmed on multiple different levels by Brian Warner, or as the world knows him as, Marilyn Manson. Evan Rachel Wood came out with a documentary on HBO called Phoenix Rising. I recently took the time to watch it in its entirety, and I encourage you to do the same if you have the time, mental space, or energy. It is incredibly well done, and it goes into more detail of some of the horrific things that Evan endured at the hands of Brian that we can't discuss on this app. Brian Warner has responded to this documentary and shared that Evan Rachel Wood and her co-conspirators should not be trusted. He has also filed a defamation lawsuit against Evan Rachel Wood and another victim who was mentioned in the documentary. Now we're going to rewind to 2010, just after Brian and Evan split. 2010, Brian reached out on social media to a young female photographer named Ashley Walters. He reached out asking to collaborate on a photo shoot with her. Excited to work with one of the biggest names in the industry, Ashley agreed and was thrilled about the opportunity. Their professional relationship quickly grew to a friendship, which then grew into Ashley becoming Brian's personal assistant. That grew into Ashley looking at Brian as family, and the two even got matching tattoos. Ashley started to become concerned when she realized how much interest Brian had in using mind control and changing sound frequencies that were played throughout the house to make his employees feel anxious, sick, agitated, or upset. Ashley also then began to notice that Brian had hidden cameras and hidden audio devices scattered throughout the house so that he could secretly gather intel on his love interests and employees. Horrifically, Ashley was hit with the harsh reality of who Brian Warner really was when Brian began offering up her body to other musicians in the industry to please them. Brian was trapped as his personal assistant. Soon after, Ashley began having panic attacks, something that was completely new to her, and that prompted her to realize that she needed to get out. When Ashley would make attempts to part with Brian, he would imprison her in his home for several days at a time. While Brian would falsely imprison Ashley, he also had her under constant surveillance. During these times, Brian would not allow Ashley to sleep for days at a time to break her psyche and make her submit to him. This is a pattern. Ashley eventually went to Brian's management and shared that she was in an unsafe situation and was unable to get out alone. Brian's management team simply shrugged her off and said, "He's done worse. It is what it is." After a year, Ashley was able to part ways with Brian, and their professional relationship, if you could call it that, ended. Ashley still suffers with PTSD and depression from what she endured at the hands of Brian Warner. In 2021, Ashley shared a detailed recount of what had happened to her on her social media in hopes that it may keep other girls and women safe. Also in 2021, another accuser of Brian Warner spoke out on social media. This time it was an ex-girlfriend named Sarah McNeil. Sarah shared that Brian lured her in with his love bombing tactics and convinced her that he was the perfect kind of man, but he was just simply misunderstood by the world. Sarah shared that once Brian had reeled her in, things got very ugly. Sarah describes what Brian put her through as torture. Sarah shared that when Brian was upset with her or upset in general, he would lock her in rooms and go into the other room and force her to listen to him making love to another woman. Sarah shared that Brian began to isolate her from her friends and family and would threaten to unalive any of her male friends or family members. Sarah also shared while on the set of one of his music videos, she brought him a couple of different pairs of pants to try on, and for whatever reason, this made Brian fly off the handle. Brian threw Sarah up against a wall and grabbed a baseball bat that was being used as a prop for the music video and threatened to bash her face in. Sarah also recounted that Brian would often hide objects or hide things from his employees and his staff and then get very angry when he couldn't find them and use it as an excuse to have an adult temper tantrum. Brian literally was manufacturing situations in order to create a situation where he could rage. He was just itching for the next moment to let his anger out on someone. A woman named Ashley Smithline also came forward and shared that she was involved with Brian Warner and was also a victim of him. In her since deleted social media post, she has shared that even today she still has night terrors, struggles with PTSD, anxiety, and OCD from the torture that she endured at the hands of Brian Warner. Another ex-girlfriend of Brian came forward. This girlfriend, choosing to remain anonymous, shared that she also endured evil embodied at the hands of Brian. After leaving the relationship, she was diagnosed with PTSD and has nightmares to this day. If all of your exes are being diagnosed with PTSD after your relationship, maybe you're the problem. Just a thought. Earlier this year, 2023, Brian has been sued by a second anonymous woman who has claimed that when she was 16 years old, Brian SA'd and groomed her. In the lawsuit filings, this anonymous woman shared that she met Brian Warner in 1995 during one of his shows in Dallas. At this time, this anonymous woman was 16 years old. The night of the concert, Brian invited this 16-year-old back to his tour bus where he allegedly SA'd her multiple times. This anonymous woman's lawsuit also included Interscope Records, claiming that they were negligent and very aware of their artist's session with harming others for pleasure. In 2021, Game of Thrones actress Esme Bianco filed a lawsuit against Brian Warner. This lawsuit contains allegations of Brian S.A.ing Esme multiple times as well as her. The filings include testimony that Brian R-worded Esme multiple times through multiple different methods, including feeding her substances and alcohol until she was incoherent, force, as well as coercion. According to the suit, Brian even R-worded Esme's unconscious body at one point. Brian and Esme were briefly romantically involved in the late 2010s, and she has shared that during this relationship, Brian was also extremely evil towards her. When he would get angry, he would lock her in rooms and tie her up in a kneeling prayer. Esme is a Jewish woman and would use a whip that was utilized by German soldiers in the 20s, if you know what I'm saying. He would also carve extremely offensive symbolism into her furniture when he became angry. I can't say what that symbol is on this app, but hopefully you can use context and put together what exactly he was carving on her furniture. Esme's lawsuit also details a time when Brian was so angry with her that he tied her up and electrocuted her. There are a lot more details of what Brian did to this poor woman, but again, we can't really go into depth on this app, so I do encourage you to do your own research into the lawsuit. In her filings, Esme shared that Brian will continue to harm others as he is being enabled by money, fame, in an industry who finds it lucrative to just turn a blind eye. She also shared that she stands with the multitude of brave women who have come forward with allegations against Brian Warner, but also recognizes that there are countless victims actively being silenced by Brian Warner and his legal team. As of present day, Brian Warner is in his mid-50s and married to a photographer named Lindsay Usich. The couple has been married since 2020 after being on and off again for almost a decade. According to concerned friends who are close to Lindsay, they have shared that she is now the target of Brian's torture and rage. My question is, when does this cycle end? No musician on this planet is talented enough to get away with being a monster. And the industry and the multitude of celebrities who support this man just strengthen the lie that men can R-word, harass, and torture other human beings and get away with it. How many people have to get hurt before this man takes any accountability? I don't know if people are afraid to call this man out due to his legacy, his connections, or maybe his intimidating appearance, but many of us see through the rock star facade and the dramatic makeup. Brian Warner is a monster and he is evil, nothing more, nothing less. The trauma that Brian endured as a child does not give him the excuse to turn around and be an unexplainably evil person to vulnerable people. Just because you've been traumatized does not give you the right to traumatize others. Unfortunately, that's not really everything. There are many other feuds and scandals that Brian Warner has been involved in. This deep dive is to show you just how much of a monster that Brian Warner, Marilyn Manson actually is. I believe every single victim that has spoken out against Brian Warner. And with that, that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one.